This is part of a series, Books That Stick in My Brain, and the last several videos in this sub-series within the series have been about John Milbank's theology and social theory and some of the main ideas that come up in that book. The last section of Milbank's book, he turns from critique to something more of a constructive or positive theology of social and political life. And he draws predominantly on Augustine and somewhat on Aquinas, but predominantly on Augustine, and says that Christian theology proposes over against both antiquity and modernity and postmodernity, proposes and pursues a counter understanding of history, a counter understanding of ethics, and a counter understanding of the world, a counter understanding of ontology or the nature of things. So this is filling out what I said in the first couple of episodes, that for Milbank, Christianity has its own understanding of social and political and economic life embedded in it. It doesn't depend on these outside disciplines. While it draws insights from experts in outside disciplines, it has its own internal understanding of these things that are part of Christian theology. So that's what Milbank is getting at the last part of his book with these counter ideas. Let me briefly summarize what he means. By counter history, he's talking about the way that the Christian theology rooted in Scripture, the way that it narrates the history of humanity and the history of the world. The master history of the world is not, as secular reason would have it, the secularization of the world, the gradual elimination and stripping away of all these accretions, these religious and other superstitions that need to be stripped away so that we get down to natural man as he truly is, unaccommodated man, as King Lear calls him. That's not what's happening. The big story of history is also not a story of increasing freedom. It's not the liberal story of gradual liberation from all constraint. The big story of human history is the story that begins with Eden, the story that includes the call of Abraham, the story of Israel fulfilled in Jesus Christ, and the history of the church. That's the big story of the world. And all other stories have a place in that. And for Christian theology to kind of squeeze and modify its story to fit into a secular narration of history is a defection from Christian theology. It's a defection from a basic conviction of Christian life. It's a defection from a basic conviction of Christian belief that we can tailor this history of Israel and Jesus and the church and make it fit a secular account of human history. This is, again, going back to my original videos on this book. This is one of the ways of saying that Christianity positions other discourses. Other accounts of history, if they're true, have to fit into that meta story that the Bible tells and that is ongoing in the history of the church. That's what he means by a counter history. Christianity has its own account of history. Christianity has its own account of ethics, which is not the same as the ancient ethics of virtue, which Milbank, in a very detailed and dense critique of Aristotle, he tries to show that even Aristotle, whom he appreciates, even Aristotle is still working with this kind of heroic ethic, where ethics is a matter of violence against some other. That's how an ancient hero gains his honor. He gains his honor by being the best and triumphing over his foes. That motive of combat is still at work, he says, in Aristotle's ethics. Now the combat is kind of turned internal, and you're combating maybe desire, you're combating passions, but it's still a matter of combating and tamping down and violence against some opponent. In contrast to that, the Christian ethic is an ethic of love and charity. Charity rather than magnanimity or temperance becomes the leading virtue for Christians. It's an ecclesial ethic, that is to say, it's an ethic that's worked out in community, in the communion of the saints within the church. It's not an individualistic ethic as you would have in some modern forms of ethics. Christianity's own understanding of ethics. And all of this, the counter-history and the counter-ethics, is rooted in what he calls a counter-ontology. Counter-ontology is, again, a Christian ontology that stands against what he calls the ontologies of violence that are present both in ancient thought, in modernity, and also in postmodernity. All of those are ontologies of violence of one sort or another. I mean, you can think in ancient thought, for example, of the warring gods of polytheistic systems. The ultimate reality of things is not peace and harmony. The ultimate reality of things is a bunch of gods that are constantly squabbling with each other. There's an ontology of violence at work there. In modernity, it's often an ontology of violence in the sense that some modern system is being imposed on, some unities have been being imposed on diversity. And one cookie cutter's form of human life is being imposed on all others. That's a kind of violence. Postmodernity is overtly an ontology of violence, in which every difference is a difference that is a conflicted difference. Every difference is a difference that is a matter of struggle and combat. This is evident in Nietzsche, it's evident in Michel Foucault, it's evident in a more subtle way in writers like Jacques Derrida and other postmodern writers who are writing about language and other sorts of things. That difference is violent difference. For Christianity, that's just not the case. The ultimate reality of all things is not pure oneness, which suppresses diversity. That would be another kind of violence. Nor is it diversity that's at war with itself. It's the Trinity. The ultimate reality is difference, absolute difference of Father, Son, and Spirit, harmonized in absolute love and peace. It's an ontology of peace rather than an ontology of violence. The original state of the world is a world at peace, not a world where violence and conflict is written into the nature of things. It's a world at peace that falls into a world of violence and conflict, and will eventually be redeemed from that, so that the world as a whole will resemble and image the harmony of difference, the harmony of peace, the ontology of peace that exists within the life of the Trinity. So that counter-ontology, that Trinitarian ontology, is at the root of the understanding of ethics that's in the Christian idea, the ethics of charity. It's at the root of the understanding of history, which is the history of Israel, Jesus Christ, and His church, and the triumph of the gospel of Jesus Christ over all other options. That combination of counter-ontology, counter-history, and counter-ethics summarizes Milbank's positive project. It's an Augustinian, what he calls a postmodern Augustinianism. It's an Augustinian that's attempting to address the pathologies of both modernity and postmodernity. It's a Christian vision of things that contests the secular world and secular reason that has distorted human life and that's the source of many of our political and social perversities.